Welcome to Statistics. In this video, we're just going to give some introductory vocabulary that will be necessary for us to delve deeper into the world of statistics. The 6 words we're going to focus on today are population, sample, statistics, parameter, variable, and data. We'll also have a quick conversation about the words mean and proportion and other vocabulary involved with these words right here. But really what we're going to do later in this course is we'll talk more detail about certain types of variables or sampling techniques. Generally in statistics, we're doing the work of discovering or finding something out about a population. A population is a group being studied. These can be people, these can be things, or these can be objects. For instance, here I have my beautiful sample population of individuals who are wearing different types of shoes. So this entire group will be the population that we're going to study. Though in the work of doing statistics, almost always you can't study the entire population. If you're trying to figure something about the education level of the population of the United States, there's no way that you can go talk to the hundreds of millions of people. So instead what you do is you take a sample of that population. A sample is a subset of the population being studied. We will delve deeper into the concepts of a representative sample of your population or a randomly selected sample. But in this case here, let's just select a sample. And again, a sample is any subset of this greater population. So I'm just going to choose every other or every third member of this population. So we have that one, 1, 2. We'll choose this one, 1, 2, that one, 1, 2, that one, 1, 2, that one. That's good enough. So out of this greater population, I've selected these 5 individuals as my sample. And what I'm trying to do today is I want to investigate the proportion or the number, it won't really matter, of individuals of this population who are wearing pink shoes. Again, this example is kind of ridiculous, but I just want to illuminate this vocabulary here because I could just count up the number in this population who have pink shoes, but let's act like I don't have time for that. I'm just going to look at the number of individuals in the sample, these 5 that I've chosen, who have pink shoes. In looking at this group of 5 individuals, I see 2 of the 5 have pink shoes. So what I would say, proportionally, I would say 2/5 have pink shoes. Now we have some information about the sample. This is called a statistic. A statistic is a numerical summary of the sample of the population. What we're going to do in a lot of the work we do in statistics is to figure out how we can accurately take a statistic from a sample and then project that onto the greater population. And there are a lot of moving pieces into this kind of investigation. We won't get into that in this video quite yet, but the idea would be I've sampled 5 individuals from this greater population. I have that 2/5 of them have pink shoes. If I had made a good choice about my sample size, about my selection of that sample, that subset of the bigger population, then I could say something like, I think the bigger populations, about 2/5 of them are wearing pink shoes. So importantly, a statistic is something that I observe. It's the truth of the sample, and I can do work to project that onto the greater population, but there is some greater truth that exists out there that is the truth about the number of individuals in that greater population that are wearing pink shoes. And that's where the word parameter comes in. A parameter is a numerical summary or characteristic of the greater population. It's what we're getting at when we're doing statistics. And given that our population is so small here, we have all our information in front of us, we can see that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 individuals out of the greater set of 15 that have pink shoes. So that would be our parameter in this kind of analysis, that 6 of 15 have pink shoes. And importantly, the difference between a statistic and a parameter is that this statistic comes from the sample and this comes from the entire population. I just want to stop there and say that these 4 words are really the main foundation to understand, and they can be confusing. There's a big difference between the population, the sample. The population is this greater group, often way too big to analyze the entire group. So what you do is you take a sample. From that sample, you find a statistic in some way in surveying them or analyzing the data in front of you. The parameter is this kind of greater truth that is out there. We often don't know the actual parameter, but we're using the statistic to make an inference about the parameter. Let's now talk about these final 2 words here. We'll talk about these, and then we'll move on to a more possibly real-life example than the one we have right here to analyze all 6 of these vocabulary words so that you feel comfortable before you move forward in statistics. All right, we have the words variable and data. Variable is a word that's used in mathematics all the time. Importantly, what this means in statistics is a variable is a characteristic that can be measured or determined about each member of the population. This variable can be numerical or categorical. What this is for instance, in this case, our variable is, do they have pink shoes? This is something that can be measured through observation of our population here. There are categorical variables also. These could be gender variables. These could be age range variables where you take not an exact number, let's say of an age of 45, but you put that in a category of all the ages from 30 to 55. And then finally, the data is the actual values of the variable. And these can be numbers or these can be words. So for instance, in this context, our variable was the number of individuals wearing pink shoes. In this case, for our sample, the data we collected is we had 2 individuals wearing pink shoes. One important thing to point out before we move forward that sometimes confuses folks in the beginning is the difference between data and statistic. And I just want to clarify that real fast by saying that data, in an average study, you'll have a lot of data points based on the variables you've chosen in your analysis of the population. The statistic is a summary of that data, specifically a summary of the population you've selected. But let's move on. Maybe the pink shoes example won't be enough to kind of ingrain this. Let's look at a more realistic study and analyze these 6 vocabulary words in that study. All right, here's our example. A state university is interested in finding out where its students come from. They surveyed 300 of their students and they're trying to figure out, are they in-state, are they out-of-state, or are they international students? Our job is to identify the sample, the data, the population, the variable, the statistic, and the parameter in this situation. Just to make it a little bit easier in our lives, I've listed these options right here. So we have the proportion of all of their students who are in-state students. We have all the students at the university. We have the 300 students they ended up surveying. We have the list of the 300 responses to the survey. We have the proportion of the 300 surveyed students who are in-state. And finally, the answer of in-state, out-state, or international. I've listed these vocabulary words in no special order, but I am going to talk about how I would attack a situation like this, because for me personally, there are some of these words that are a bit more difficult and not obvious, and some are very clear. For me, the population and the sample are the easiest to identify. Remember, the population is this group being studied, and in this case, that would be all the students at the university. So I get that right off the bat here. So this is the population being studied, so we can take that off the list. And remember, what we won't do is survey the entire population. What we do is take a sample of that population in order to survey or to study, and that is these 300 students right here. This, in this situation, will be our sample. All right, next up, I'm going to tackle the statistic and the parameter. These are both numerical summaries. The parameter is the numerical summary for the entire population. The statistic is the numerical summary for just the sample who was studied. In this case, our numerical summaries would be these statements actually that have these proportions. So the proportion of all their students who are in-state students, that is what we would call a parameter because it's a numerical summary of this population. And then we have the statistic. The statistic is the numerical summary of that sample. That sample is the 300 students, so the proportion of the 300 students surveyed, this is the statistic. And we only have 2 vocabulary words left, and actually only 2 things to choose from. We have data and the variable. The variable is what we're trying to get information about. The data is that actual information that we have found from our surveying in this case. So we have the answer of in-state, out-of-state, or international. That is actually our variable. That's what we're testing, or what we're looking to know more information about. And we've got that information in the list of those 300 responses, and that is the data. Just a couple comments before we finish. These words can seem like a lot. A couple of them might seem very familiar and easy. A few of these might be very foreign and very difficult. The important thing is take time with these now, but we're going to use these throughout this course and you'll get more used to them. I personally like to group them. I group the population, the sample in my head. The population is what we're studying, but it almost always doesn't make sense to study the whole population. So we take a sample. We're going to talk a lot more about this pretty soon about, well, how large of a sample should you have, or how do you pick your sample? Those are important to infer about the validity of the research you'll be doing. We also have the variable and the data. This is what you're studying. This is the kind of response that you're looking at. The data is the actual information you get about the variable. And finally, the statistic and the parameter are very similar. The parameter is the numerical summary of the entire population. The statistic is what we find out about that sample that we study. For now, what I would do is write the definitions of all 6 of these in the most sensical way you can that makes sense to you in a place that's easy to refer to. So as we move forward, if you get lost in thinking about what was a parameter again and how is that different than a statistic, you can easily reference that just to remind yourself of these different words.